Good afternoon, everybody. It's brilliant to see you all here. Thank you so much for coming. Just turn to someone and say, you look absolutely fantastic this afternoon. You smell wonderful. Just be encouraging. That'll be good. Great. Well, welcome. My name's Patrick Regan, and I'm the co-founder of a charity called Kintsugi Hope, which I'll explain a little bit later. But it's a real privilege to be here with you guys. I remember doing school assemblies in this hall, so it seems quite nice being back. And I used to live in Peckham for 25 years. So I'm one of those guys that have lived in Peckham so long, I argue with the sat-nav when it takes me a different way. Do you know that sort of thing? And just because you know all the little back streets and everything. So it's really brilliant to be here. Thank you so much. We've got a little stand in the area just out of this door and then left. So if you do want to chat to us afterwards, you've got any questions at all, please come and talk to us. We're only here for today, unfortunately. We're quite a small team, so we haven't got the resources. But some of the flyers and some leaflets will be there if you were interested. I've written a number of books on the subject of emotional mental health, one called When Faith Gets Shaken, which sort of says what it does on the tin, really. And two that you may be interested in. The first one's called Honesty Over Silence. It has a tagline of saying, it's okay not to be okay. And I guess this is really looking at the theology of mental health and how we can deal with it as well. And then just before the pandemic hit, I was getting so many emails on the back of this book. It sold incredibly well. And people were just telling me their really sad stories, often been in church for years and felt like they couldn't be honest about their mental health. And as I was reading these stories, I was like, I do believe it's okay not to be okay, but I don't want people to stay not being okay. I want people to flourish. I want people to do really, really well. So I said to my publisher, I'm thinking of writing a book on resilience. And resilience, by definition, is thriving in the midst of adversity. So imagine how I felt 2 months before the pandemic started, trying to write a book, thriving in the midst of adversity, and then everything kicked off. I said to my wife, I can't do this is too hard. And she's like, for a time such as this, you've got to write this book. And so I decided to call it Bouncing Forwards, because every time I heard someone talk about resilience, they always talked about bouncing back. And I was like, I don't want to bounce back. Why do I want to go back to my pre-trauma self that's been through less? That I want to learn all the lessons that I've been through this trauma, and for the good and for the bad. I want to learn what it means to bounce forwards, to change. My values have been changed. And so that's what the book is all about, notes on resilience, courage, and change. And these books are only here after this session. They'll be taken away after that. So if you're interested in getting one, do get one, or you can get it online if you're watching online. And we're very COVID safe with card machines and all that sort of jazz as well. So Kintsugi Hope, Kintsugi is a Japanese word. It means golden joinery. So if you take a bowl and you break it, you mend it with super glue. And the whole idea of mending it with super glue is you hide the cracks. You pretend it's not broken. You pretend it's all okay. But what they do in Japan is they put a gold powder in the glue. So instead of hiding the cracks, they make a feature of the cracks. Arguably, the object becomes more beautiful for being broken. It certainly becomes more unique. There isn't a bowl like that on planet Earth. And I'm a firm believer that beauty can come out of brokenness, that our scars are not there to be ashamed of. Jesus, in his resurrected body, had scars. There'll be scars in heaven. And we started this charity about 3 or 4 years ago now called Kintsugi Hope. And just to explain a little bit of my story and why we started it, I guess I was one of those Christian workers, I'm sure some of you can relate to this, that was so passionate about what he was doing, but working really, really, really hard. Does anyone know what I'm talking about here? And working really hard. And I felt like I was a little bit like a phone. Now, my phone here works as well on 100% as it does 5%. There's nothing this phone can't do on 5% that it can do on 100%. And sometimes what I felt like I was doing is like I was working really, 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 really hard, and then I would have to rest a bit because I could tell I was getting to the edge of burnout. And then so I rested a couple of days or maybe a couple of weeks, and then I went up to about 10%, and then I started doing the same thing again. And actually, a lot of us in ministry do that, and it's just not sustainable. It's not sustainable for us. And eventually you start to burn out. And yet sometimes the show reel can look amazing. I remember a few years ago now, we had a visit, the charity that I was running, by the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. Here they are next to my wife. My wife's the one in the black, just in case you're wondering. And actually, there was a funny story about this picture. Catherine had just turned to Di, my wife, and said, do you like my dress? And she was like, I'm not sure what you meant to say when the Duchess of Cambridge said, do you like my dress? She was like, it's a very nice dress. And she said, oh, that's good. William says I look like a tablecloth. I can sort of see his point, but I probably wouldn't say that. And you know, these pictures, there's a load of them here. They literally went around the world. They were in OK magazine and Hello magazine and this newspaper, then the BBC News, and it was literally everywhere. And everyone was texting me going, Patrick, the show reel, it looks amazing. Look at all the stuff that you're doing. And I remember this one photograph. This is me on the steps of All Hallows London Wall in the city with Catherine. And people were like, it's incredible. And I was saying, you don't realise that in this photo, I'm someone who's struggling with anxiety, just to go into a dark time of depression, and yet the show reel looks fantastic. And I realised that as well as communicating the show reel, we need to communicate the behind the scenes. We desperately need to have honesty over silence. We need to be a bit more real and a bit more authentic. And the problem is when I was telling people that I think I'm starting to struggle with my mental health, particularly in the church, they would go, well, you know what you need to do, don't you? I'll be like, pray harder. I'm literally praying as hard as I can. I just feel like God ain't listening to me. I don't know what else to do. And then you get the shoulds, the must, the oughts. I should be able to cope. What's wrong with me? I've got a family to look after, a job I'm passionate about. I must pull myself together or I'll let everyone down. I know God loves me, but actually, I don't feel like I'm in control at the moment. I ought to be stronger. Get a grip. Spend more time praying. And so I started to write and I started to be honest because I had a real sense of shame. And you know, it often says that shame and guilt are two very different things, aren't they? Guilt is I've done something wrong. Shame is I feel like I am wrong. Brené Brown famously says that shame loves silence, secrecy, and judgment. It has two gremlins. Who do you think you are? And you're not enough. And yet so often when you're running at what appears to be a very successful ministry is you don't have those people you can start to be real and honest with. And the advice that I was given was quite shocking. I want to show you this little video clip now. I find this video clip quite amusing and quite sad at the same time, but so near the mark to lots of things that I was told when I was struggling with my mental health. Check this out.
Is your partner's depression bumming you out?
Are your friends' frequent anxiety attacks standing in the way of you having a good time?
Is your friend's inescapable downward spiral of insomnia-fueled dissociative episodes that has obliterated their ability to function really killing your vibe?
I've just been really overwhelmed lately and I don't know what to do.
Cool. When your friend reaches out to you for help, wouldn't it be great to be able to just press a button and make it all go away? You know, without really listening or making any effort to understand the situation. Well, now you can. Introducing Thanks, I'm Cured. Thanks, I'm Cured comes pre-programmed with over 1,500 automated responses guaranteed to make you feel like you're helping.
I just don't know how much more of this I can take.
You should probably just exercise more.
So I just don't see any reason to keep going.
My partner opened up to me about their mental illnesses, and I didn't have the understanding or experience to offer any qualified advice. But that didn't stop me from weighing in anyway.
Have you tried being more positive?
I could tell my friend was upset, and I really wanted to feel useful, but I didn't want to put in any effort or inconvenience myself in any way.
It could always be worse. Happiness is a choice. Just snap out of it. Yoga really worked for me. Have you tried chamomile tea?
But wait, there's more. With the new relatability expansion, for when you'd prefer to make it all about you.
Oh my god, I'm OCD too.
Just let me know if there's anything I can do to help. I'm happy to just listen if you want to talk. Wrong! Why would you waste your time listening or trying to broaden your perspectives when you can just use a one-size-fits-all platitude instead?
This too shall pass.
My depression was stopping me from doing the things that I love, but then my partner told me I just need to try harder. Can't believe I didn't think of that before.
It's all just in your head.
I spent years battling with severe panic attacks, absolutely crippling. But then I did a push-up, and now I'm cured.
Stop being so selfish.
I had a chemical imbalance in my brain that prevented it from making the required levels of serotonin needed to regulate my moods like regular people. But then my friend suggested I don't be that way, and I've never looked back.
Other people have it much worse than you.
Wow, thanks! I'm cured!
Smiling.
Here it is. Thanks I'm Cured is available for free and completely unsolicited wherever good intentioned but ultimately unqualified friends, family and strangers can be found.
Hey folks, we wanted to make these videos to make talking
Okay,
about mental
let's,
health
stop
more
that there,
accessible
thank
and
you.
to normalise it. Is your part...
So, frightening, but actually quite near the mark in some cases. And when I was writing the book, Honesty Over Silence, I did a chapter on anxiety, because anxiety was the thing I was really struggling with. And actually getting to church was even quite a big deal for me. And I just felt like I was falling, and I couldn't grab hold of anything, and I just felt like out of control. And of course, that when often you talk about anxiety, it's always seen in a negative light. And when I was doing my research, I wanted to find out of a sort of like a definition I could use, I guess. And of course, you've got the normal sort of fight, flight, or freeze, and you've got very technical stuff. I was like, but I want to talk about how it felt. And so I started reading blogs by normal people. And I got some really interesting insights. And I found this definition, which I actually think is really beautiful. It says this: more than anything else, anxiety is caring. It's never wanting to hurt someone's feelings. It's never wanting to do something wrong. More than anything, it's the want and the need to be accepted and liked. So you try too hard sometimes. You try too hard sometimes. And actually, people that struggle with anxiety are normally beautiful, sensitive, caring people. The challenge is, it's a bit like a car alarm, isn't it? If it's going off all the time, it's really, really hard. It's annoying for you and for everyone else, but it has a function. And I think that instead of responding with judgmental attitudes, we need to understand empathy. And so I came to the conclusion that depression, anxiety, and panic attacks are not signs of weakness, they're signs of trying to remain strong for too long. There's a psychiatrist called Tim Katabar who wrote a book called Clinical Depression, The Curse of the Strong. You may have heard of it. It's a very famous book, really good book, thoroughly recommend. And he said, as a psychologist, he can tell the personal characteristics of someone that's suffering depression before they start to speak, 9 times out of 10, most of the time. And he said the personal characteristics of someone struggling with depression is this: moral strength, reliability, diligence, strong conscience, a strong sense of responsibility, a tendency to focus on the needs of others before one's own, sensitivity, vulnerable to criticism, self-esteem dependent on the evaluation of others. Does that look like a weak person to you? People that struggled with this: Oliver Cromwell, Abraham Lincoln, Vincent van Gogh, Winston Churchill, Mother Teresa. Rick Warren, when his 27-year-old son died by suicide, said this: it's not a sin to be sick. Your illness isn't your identity, and your chemistry is not your character. Everything in the world is broken because of sin. So why is it if my liver doesn't work perfectly, I take a pill for that and there's no shame in that? If my heart doesn't work perfectly, I take a pill for that and there's no shame in that. If my lungs don't work perfectly, I take a pill for that and there's no shame in that. So why then, if my brain doesn't work perfectly, I take a pill for that, I'm supposed to hide that? So as I started writing about all these issues, I was just, like I said, overwhelmed. And I wrote, my previous book was called When Faith Gets Shaken, and a friend of mine called Andy Flanagan, who's a singer-songwriter, he said, I'll tell you what we should do, is we should take the message of these books and just do a little tour around churches. I'll sing some songs and you can tell people about the theme of the book. And at the end, why don't we finish by just asking people to write down something that they've just carried for too long? And I'll sing Psalm 22, and we'll ask them just to put it on the cross, not as it's now disappeared, but just as an acknowledgement, God, I need you in this situation. And I thought, no one's going to book this. It's going to be a complete waste of time. And actually, we had like 40 shows that we did. It was just overwhelming. And at the end, you can see that we had this cross, and people were coming. And about 80% of everything that was on that cross and every night was stuff around mental and emotional health. And when we started talking to people, they were like, we just don't talk to people about this sort of stuff. And I remember then, at the end of the meeting, I'd stand there with the vicar, the priest, the pastor, whatever denomination we were in. And normally they were like, wow, I knew it was tough. Didn't realize it was that tough. What do I do now? And so we felt really challenged. And so we started to pray, and we started to really feel that maybe we were being called to do something that would tackle two big issues in society: social isolation and poor mental health. And then we started to study wholeness. So this is the Waverly Abbey wholeness model, which says, you know what, we can't separate these things out like we so often do in our talks and in our theology. That actually our thinking, our physical, our spiritual, emotional, and behavioral health is all linked together. And so I remember praying one day, and I remember saying to God, I'll do anything for you apart from run a charity, because I never want to fundraise ever again in my life. I've done. And I really felt this little nudge, not to think charity, but to think movement. And I was like, what does that mean? So I had a sabbatical, and I studied movements. I looked at parkrun. Anyone here ever done parkrun? There's a few. Well, that's quite impressive, actually. Well done. The rest of you, get fit. The second thing I looked at, and the really interesting thing about parkrun is different cultures, different ages, different abilities. You belong, but you don't have to fit in. Amazing. Hundreds of thousands of people in parks. And then I looked at rock choir. Anyone come across rock choir? Rock choir, exactly the same thing. Choirs start in community centres, in churches, in schools. They hire Wembley Arena, 18,000 people come. Different cultures, different ages, different abilities. You belong, but you don't have to fit in. I look at what Weight Watchers. Anyone here done? No, let's not do that. That's terrible. That's a terrible thing to say. I looked at Weight Watchers. I looked at Alcoholics Anonymous. I looked at all these community groups that started in the grassroots of community where you belong, but you don't have to fit in. And then we started saying, wouldn't it be amazing if we could start well-being groups in our community, a little bit like Weight Watchers for well-being, where we could teach management tools on how to handle your anxiety and how to deal with depression, how to support other people that are going through it. And then they say that vision is the art of seeing the invisible that produces passion and energy in people. That's why Jim Wallace said Martin Luther King stood up and didn't say, I've got a complaint to make. You notice some of the visionary meetings could be the most boring meetings you've ever been to. He said, I've got a dream. I've got a dream of justice and equality. And he rallied people around the dream. And so our dream is very simply this, is that we want to see a world where mental and emotional health is understood and accepted with safe and supportive communities where people can grow and flourish. And so we started writing this 12-week program. And we wrote it in learning styles because we realized that what might work in Peckham, where God lives, may be very different to Surrey, or to Croydon, or to Belfast, where we're doing loads of work, or Scotland, or Wales, or the Midlands. And so there's 7 learning styles, depending on what theory you look at, that people learn in. They learn very differently. And so we wrote it in all these different styles so that people could deliver it to the context. Having lived in Peckham most of my life, most of the stuff that I found coming out was actually aimed at the white middle classes. And I thought, this is never going to work. So let's try and be a bit more creative. Let's try and work out how we can communicate this stuff better. And then we're like, but what's the goal? What's the aim? And we had 4 key aims. Is we wanted safety and support where there's no embarrassment in struggling. An increase in self-worth, confidence and well-being. A deeper understanding of God's love for them. That wasn't an added extra. That wasn't the thing we're going to sneak in at the end. That's banging one of our outcomes. And then the 4th one, clear pathways to receive additional help. And so we started. And we started training churches to run it. And oh my goodness, I was amazed by some of the churches. Some churches started running it as home groups. I guess a lot of you have home groups, life groups, connect groups, neighborhood groups, cell groups. And what they started to do is like, let's try and ask the people who would never come to something like Alpha, who might come to this. So I did that in my life group. My life group trebled in size. We went to 17 very, very quickly. My neighbor came along, who I've been trying to get to things, and absolutely loved it. But then other churches were amazing. One church was like, well, we work with the homeless. This would be brilliant for the homeless. And they run it in a homeless hostel. Another church in Scotland were like, we're going to run this in the hairdressers. I was like, that's a brilliant idea. Hairdressers are half therapists, half counsellors anyway. What a fantastic idea. There was a guy down in Wales, they were like, well, maybe we could run this in a farmer's market because farmers have a very high rate of suicide. And people started working with social prescribing. I guess you're all familiar with social prescribing. And started working with the NHS, schools, prisons, universities. And I said to my wife, oh my goodness, what have we started? And this map shows you where we were working. And we were really, really excited. And then COVID hit. And I was like, we're doomed. We're absolutely doomed. We're going to have no money. It's not going to work. What's going to happen? But my tech guys were like, we can move all the training online. So now anyone from around the UK can do it. And we could do live Zoom meetings where people interact if we need to. But it could be amazing at this time. And actually, there wasn't much in the church which was missional. There was quite a lot of Bible studies about mental health, but not much which was missional. And so actually, the opposite happened. This is where we're working today. It's gone a little bit crazy. And actually, it feels like a movement. People are coming to faith. People are coming back to faith. People have started the 12 weeks saying they're having suicidal thoughts. By the end of the 12 weeks, they went and got a job. We've had people who've just said it's just helped them step out of shame. There's this one beautiful lady who, she'd lost her kids to foster care. So if you've lost your kids to foster care, basically you've had a judge say that you're not fit to be a mum. And for the first 3 weeks, they did it on Zoom, and she sat there with the light off, just a silhouette where you could see her face. And then on week 4, it's about shame. And we talk about shame, love, silence, secrecy, and judgment. By week 5, the light is on, and you can see her face for the first time. And I'm like, that's what Jesus does. He allows people to step out of shame where they know that they're loved and they're cared for. And it's just been an amazing, amazing experience. This little advert went across social media, and this is what shows you what Kintsugi Group is. Check this out.
Life can feel like a game of Tetris. No matter what you do, sometimes the blocks don't line up. Days spent trying to keep all the plates spinning, but sometimes it's just one plate too many. Or perhaps you're giving out of an empty cup. Some of us invest in our physical well-being. Why not invest in your mental and emotional well-being? We can all feel broken, but we can all discover treasure in life's scars. Join the Kintsugi Hope Wellbeing Group.
So they're even running in the police force as well, which is incredible. So if you're interested in it, you need to get one of these flyers from our stand, and it's got the 12 weeks in there, and it's just got all the information, all the learning styles. There's a youth version that runs in schools. There's a student version that runs in universities. And we're working with all sorts of different denominations to work in partnership. But I think it's a little bit like this. My friend said to me, it was a little bit like this. If you've got cancer, I've been to 2 funerals, yesterday and the day before. It seems like cancer's everywhere at the moment. But if you've got cancer, you would hope that the doctors would provide the chemo and the radiotherapy to help someone through their cancer journey. But to get through a cancer journey, you need love, community, and support. And it's the same with mental health. We can't do what mental health professionals can do, and we shouldn't try, but everyone needs love, community, and support. And that's where the church can come in. The church are in every community across this country. and we can offer so much of love, community, and support. 2 Corinthians 4, this is what Kintsugi is based on really, but we have this treasure in jars of clay to show the all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. And when Paul was writing that, the context he's writing in it, I'm sure you're aware of. And a lot of theologians believe that Paul, between 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians, had some sort of breakdown. He was actually really, really struggling at times. And the interesting thing about those jars of clay that he mentioned is the jars of clay were made to be fragile. They were made to break in the kiln. Why? So the light could get out. Because beauty can come out of brokenness. I said to, in one of my prayers, I said, God, if the next big thing is going to be some massive meeting somewhere, and there's going to be some really famous person speaking and a really good worship band, and God TV are going to come and they're going to beam it around the world and we're going to call it revival, I think I might just quit. But you know what? If something special could happen in small groups, in brothels, and in homeless hostels, and in schools, and in universities, and in prisons, and in people's homes, and in coffee shops, and in pubs. And if it's not led by the great, the charismatic, and the famous, but maybe by the fragile, the humble, and the courageous, then I'm up for seeing something like that happen. And that was the heart of Kintsugi Hope. So please come and chat to us afterwards. So this was all going on, and I was getting a little bit overwhelmed. So I got many leaders together, including Bishop Richard Charters, who's our patron, who I'm sure many of you will know, and other people, some other bishops, some other leaders of denominations. And I'm saying, this is what's going on. What should we do? And we had this fascinating conversation which went like this. Patrick, we really appreciate that you are creating safe and supportive spaces for people that struggle with mental and emotional health. What we want to ask is, what if the church isn't a safe and supportive space? Because a third of people coming to your groups are not Christians. This is their first interaction. And then they come into a church. If the church isn't a safe and supportive space, then what then? And I felt really challenged. And so I managed to get some funding from somewhere, and we commissioned Theos. I guess most of you are aware of Theos. And we asked Theos to do a piece of research for us, is what does a mental health friendly church look like? What are the key issues for us as the church to grapple with today? And this report, if you want it in full, definitely the exec summary is downloadable from our website, which again you can get from the stand. And it was fascinating. And I'm just going to share you some of the insights that came from Theos. Some of the statistics were these. Common one. 1 in 4 people struggle with their mental health each year. More than 2/3 of adults in the UK reported feeling somewhat or very worried about the impact of COVID-19 on their lives. And that was a really interesting thing, because what the report said is actually COVID has changed the way we look at mental health. It's changed the way everyone looks at mental health now. And so in that sense, there is a real opportunity to have an honest conversation. Those with pre-existing mental health conditions were less likely to be coping well, 34%. 53% of people cited mental illness, and 79% isolation and loneliness, so much greater problem in their parish. And one of the things we noticed was really important to address is the whole issue around language. Because there is a massive difference, isn't there, between mental illness and mental health. Every single person in this room has mental health, and some of us will have a mental illness. And so I don't know if you guys have come across mental health first aid. Has anyone come across that? So it's a brilliant course. And the mental health first aid would recommend what is called here the mental health continuum. And it's a really helpful way of understanding mental health and the way that it can change. Because you can have a person with no mental illness or disorder, and it can have positive mental health. But you can also have a person with no diagnosed mental illness or disorder who has poor mental health. You know, I've got some friends, they're very aware of their mental health, and they take medication and they feel stigmatized, but their mental health in some ways is better than mine. because they've been there and they're very boundaried. And we keep an eye on them, but they do really, really well. And they serve in church and they do a really amazing job. But what happens is we can move around this continuum. And I think it's really important for us to understand that language matters. And that what we want is actually people to have a good mental health, to be flourishing, to cope well with what life is throwing at them. When it came to talking to the church, this is the statistics that came back from the church, less than the society. 43% of respondents had experience of mental health issues in their lives. UK Christians overwhelmingly agree that churches can help people experiencing mental health issues, which was encouraging. 35% of respondents felt supported by their church in regards to their mental health. There's a strong consensus respondents aren't caused by personal action or sin. And then the report started to look at what they called negative lay theologies, which I guess fell into 4 camps. Number 1, the negative theology that some people had received because they struggled with mental health was it was a lack of faith. And that verses that are plucked out of context, Philippians 4 verse 6 is a very common one, do not be anxious about anything, had been used to make people feel very, very guilty. And people really struggled with this. I always think about Jesus and the blind beggar at the side of the road when he shouts out, "Son of David, have mercy on me." And they come to Jesus and say, "Why is this person blind? Is it because he sinned or his ancestors have sinned?" And Jesus says, "There's no cause and effect here." And he gets on with the healing. Lack of faith is a very dangerous thing that some people have experienced. Another one was selfishness, that the belief that mental illness in and of itself is inherently sinful, given the belief that it's rooted in selfishness. Again, I just think it's the opposite. Some of the people I know that struggle with anxiety and depression, they're the most courageous people I know. The most kind people, the most sensitive people. People that often can pick up how others are feeling so quickly. Not selfish. And then we come on to the other ones. Personal sin. Belief that one's beliefs have thankfully receded slightly according to our research, that mental health issues are a direct result of personal sin. And actually, this isn't as bad as it used to be. And then there's the issue of demons, which is often the elephant in the room for some, depending on what group of people that I'm talking to. And it's really interesting that we are not denying the reality of the spiritual realm. We're not denying there's a spiritual battle. It's not about throwing the baby out with the bathwater type of thing. But it's interesting, when you talk about mental illness, that is often where people jump to first. My very good friend Will Vanderhart says this: you cannot medicate demons. So if a person responds to antipsychotic medication, their issue is obviously neuropsychological and not spiritual. We are typically cautious about changing the meaning of Scripture, apart from when Jesus heals a person from demonic possession. There we seem more than happy to say that that was actually a mental illness. And I think we have to be so careful about the way that we deal with this issue. That demons don't often respond to antidepressants. Actually, they can be useful at times. Now, where do we go from here? So the other 3 big takeaways from this research were these. Number 1 is 91% of church leaders felt like they had no training on mental health issues. Now, that was actually quite staggering for me. I thought it might be 60 to 70%. 91%. And this wasn't a go at church leaders, because I know I'm talking to a lot of church leaders, because actually I think that the way, it's a totally different seminar, but I think sometimes the way we deal with leadership is unsustainable. We expect our leaders to be caretakers, fundraisers, CEOs, volunteer managers. There's a massive list, isn't it? It's just not sustainable. But what it was is actually, when we looked into it, it was that Bible college didn't really teach a lot of this stuff. We could understand Greek and Hebrew, but we don't know how to recognize anxiety in someone. And actually, that it needs to shift. And so one of the things I've been talking to is talking to the heads of Bible colleges going, where is the bit of mental health and mental illness in your curriculum? How are you preparing ordinands for working in the community in this particular area? The pressure on leaders is so intense. So we've developed a training course very similar to mental health first aid, but called Mental Health Friendly Church, which actually trains churches in how to deal with some of this stuff in their community and in their church, which is going down incredibly well. The second key thing here is that we said is name your position. Name our position. What happened with this is that when we read the report, most churches, when asked about their position on mental health or mental illness, remained neutral. We don't really have a position. Which, of course, if you struggle with mental health or mental illness, that doesn't really help you. In fact, it's the opposite of helping. It means it stays silent. But, of course, if 91% of people aren't receiving any training on it, then I guess that sort of filters through, doesn't it? And so, again, there's a real challenge on understanding the theology of mental health. And again, we know that the Bible's packed full of this stuff. We might not use the term mental health, but it talks about shalom all the time. Jesus, Prince of Peace, Prince of well-being. Shalom is all about well-being. Elijah, I always think that is the most fascinating story, and unfortunately, in my job, I've had to deal with people who've had suicidal thoughts, or parents who've had kids. There was a kid, a family I was working with not far from here actually, the 15-year-old girl hung herself in the school toilets and having to pick that up. And we don't talk about suicide, but suicide, is the biggest killer of young men. Guys, we're not doing ourselves any favors whatsoever by not talking about our mental health. It kills more than cancer. And I've literally been doing blokes meetings all over the place in councils, and I've got a vision of taking it into bars and into clubs, and actually we need to have this conversation. I was at a funeral yesterday, and my very good friend Les Isaac was leading it, who you may know, and he said to the guys there, guys, seriously, one thing I can say to you is get therapy and get counselling, and do not bottle what you're feeling right now. As we looked at a coffin with a 47-year-old who's just died too young. But we don't talk about this stuff. And I've seen it time and time again. And what happens is, and I saw this particularly a lot in my work here, was that when we don't deal with it, it translates into anger. And I always talk about anger as being an emotional response to pain. Anger's like a blocked goal. Anger's telling you something's wrong. You notice in the Bible, it never says don't be angry. It says in the Ecclesiastes, don't let anger become a resident, but it could become a visitor. In your anger, do not sin. And there's a sense of how do we deal with anger? I've never heard a decent sermon on anger, apart from Jesus and the money changers. Anyone else? There's so much about this stuff that is so important for people's lives at the moment that we need to deal with. My friend who's a Met Borough commander, he said you are never 100 yards away from you're always 100 yards away from a domestic violence case. 100 yards. He said if you live in the suburbs, it may be slightly further, but not much. He says it's the pandemic of our time. So these are huge issues that we know that God is calling us to do something with. Name your position. And then the third thing, and I think this is where it gets a little bit more cheerful, is that where churches are doing really well is when they've learned to be a gentle presence in people's lives. Because you see, I can't be a mental health expert. I often suffer from imposter syndrome. Does any other leader suffer from imposter syndrome? Some days you think you're just going to be found out. Maybe this is my afternoon of being found out. And everything you've ever achieved, anything you've ever done is just a complete fluke. And to be honest, when we all admit it, then we all feel a bit like that at times. But actually what people need is they don't need experts all the time. They need a gentle presence. I can't give my friends massive psychiatric advice, but I can take them to the GP. I can have a coffee with them. And it was amazing when the churches were doing things that were gentle presence. It was just incredible what was going on. Cheryl Richardson says this, people start to heal the moment they feel heard. And a good example that we use is Jesus on the road to Emmaus, which I think is just so beautiful. I often thought the day after Jesus' resurrection, if a marketing person had been in that situation, what would they have said? Jesus, we need to get the word out. A feeding of the 5,000 would be really helpful at this time, or a Sermon on the Mount or something like that. That would be really, really good. I'm like, oh my goodness. The Son of God spends the day after his resurrection walking with two heartbroken people who are struggling with grief and despair. He does that for 3 or 4 hours on the way to Emmaus. That's incredible. And they weren't people of influence. You know, sometimes I get asked to speak at after dinner things, and you can tell at the start, before the dinner starts, is people always going around trying to work out who's got the money. You know, and when they get to me, they suddenly think, oh, he's the charity guy, he's definitely got no money. And they move on really, really quickly. Because I've got no money, I've got no influence. But actually with Jesus, that was what almost qualified you to spend time with them. Have we got the wrong values? Our values are our priorities. Our values are what matters most to us. Jesus spent the first day after his resurrection walking with two heartbroken people. And the interesting thing about that conversation is that at no point did he interrupt. And as they were telling Jesus of their pain and their anxiety and what's happened, at no point did he interrupt and go, guys, it's all good. I'm Jesus. Everything's okay. Ta-da! Let's change the subject. He listened. He listened to their pain. He listened to their anxiety. And the thing I find fascinating, and some of you are more theological minded than me, can tell me what happened here. But you know, when they got to Emmaus, they had the meal, and in Scripture it says that Jesus was then going to go on. And they persuaded him to stay for the meal. The big reveal hadn't happened yet. The big reveal of who Jesus was hadn't happened yet. And Jesus was going to leave them hanging. I don't understand it. Maybe he knew what was going to happen, but I don't know. But the fact is, brokenness revealed who Jesus was. And that's the priority, and I think it's got to be our priority today. When I was writing Bouncing Forwards, I was looking at Samuel Wells's work on the Good Samaritan. I don't know if you've come across that. And he was saying that often in the West, when we read that story, we are always the Good Samaritan. We're always the rescuer. And yet some people don't want to be rescued. He said in the East, we're always the beggar at the side of the road, the broken one, and Jesus is always the Good Samaritan. Jesus is always the rescuer. Jesus is always the hero. We are not the hero. We can't be the hero all the time. So I get asked to speak at all sorts of different places, and which is a real honor and a privilege. And I was speaking at a conference about a month ago, and they were like, just say what's on your heart. Just say what you think needs to happen at the moment. And so I spoke at the story of David, and I said there's 3 things I really feel that God's put on my heart. And it's about the opposite to what every other speaker said in this conference, which makes me feel a little bit awkward. I'm not going to lie. And the first one is this: think small. Because all the other sermons I'd heard about were taking stadiums for Jesus and doing this massive initiative and that massive initiative and stuff. I said, it's this. Think small doesn't mean you stay small. But what it means is you seek out the poor, the broken, the last, the lost, the least. David, as a shepherd boy, he looked pretty insignificant, and yet he was the one that took down Goliath. When God decided to change the whole of history, it was in a baby born to a teenage couple, soon to be refugees on the run in Africa, like many refugees. Think small. What is it going to happen in the grassroots of community? And of course, Kintsugi Hope is a massive example of that. The second key thing was create space. We're too busy. It's not sustainable. We can't do everything. But you know, when we start ministering to people, when we realize there's no them and us, there's just us, then actually we all benefit from talking about our mental health. If you define culture as the way we do things around here, then what needs to change about our culture? What needs to change about our leadership cultures? How do we change the way that we do things? We need to create space. How about create space for people's questions and their doubts? You know, one of the things I loved about my Kintsugi group was we got to the week 8 on forgiveness. And this lady, Catherine, she wasn't a Christian. She looked at me at one point and she went, "You Christians, you have to forgive everyone, don't you?" And looked at me, and at that point, and she went, "How is that even possible? How do you forgive someone who isn't sorry? Why do you forgive everyone?" So at that point, I looked at my wife and went, "That's a really good question. Do you want to take that one, darling? That would be fantastic." Allow doubts, allow questions. 40% of the Psalms are laments. They're David crying out, "I just don't get it anymore." Allow people to understand people's grief and their pain and what they're going through. And then the last one I said, is I just think we need to think differently. We need to think differently about what's going on in our lives. A few years ago now, I went to Trenchtown in Jamaica. I don't know if you know of that. It's where Bob Marley grew up. And it's one of the most violent places on earth, really. It's just incredible. It's beautiful. It is so lovely. The people are just so kind, but there's gunshots most nights. And I was there, and I was meant to be speaking at something, and this beautiful friend of mine, she rang me one night from underneath her bed because she was hiding from gunshots. And I could hear all these gunshots firing through the air. And she was like, Pastor Patrick, pray for me, I don't want to die tonight. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to run down there or run down there, risk getting shot yourself, or what do I do? I just don't know. So I mumbled some prayer that didn't really feel like it had any authority in it whatsoever. And then the next day we went down, and I went round her house, and I saw where the bullets were coming through the windows, through the shutters rather. And we sat down, and we talked about some of the issues in their community. And he was like, tonight, should we do a peace concert? I was like, yeah, that would be a really good idea. and what we can do, we do it in the street, because what we can do is we can get a stage, and you can put a stage in the middle of the street, and then that way you can speak to both sides of the community, because this side doesn't walk to this side of the community, and that side doesn't walk to that side of the community. And I remember there, and then my friend Les Isaac would be there, and I thought, that would be brilliant. He can speak. He's a brilliant speaker. They'll love him. And so we all got there, and it was tense. It was so tense. And then they had a bit of a band on. No one was really listening to the music. It was a little bit hard. And then it was the time for the speaker to go up. And I was like, oh, God, I'm so glad Les is here. That's so helpful. And Les turns to me and goes, go on then. I was like, what do you mean, go on then? And he was like, they're all waiting to see what the white boy's got to say. And I was like, well, what do you mean? He's going, seriously, like they've worked out that you're not police. They're all waiting to see what the white boy's got to say. Why does the white boy come to Trenchtown? And then he said this, and this has actually changed my life. He said, because often you white boys, when you come to Jamaica, you go to your nice flash conferences and your nice stages and your TV programs. They are fascinated to see what the white boys come to Trenchtown for. And I was like, I don't want to be that. I want to think differently. I want to think differently. How do we do things differently? How do we do things where it's not them and us, it's just us? How do we create a movement where it can actually work in different, whether it's the hairdressers, whether it's the police, whether it's the prison, whether it's a farmer's market? How can we be a community? And I remember, like it was yesterday, I stood on that stage and I looked out. And it was a little bit similar to this, apart from, obviously, you're not gang members. Well, maybe some of you are, I don't know. But there was, a couple of hundred people there, and it was similar to two sides like this. And there were lots of women there not wearing many clothes. And because by not wearing many clothes, they were saying, look at me, sir. Tell me that I'm worth something, sir. Tell me that I'm valuable. Gays, sir. Broken. Kids running around everywhere. Just chaotic. Gunmen at the side, guns down their trousers, sticking out a little bit so you can see it, looking at the other guys on the other side of the road. And so I just did a little illustration, which you've all used at Sunday school, okay? I got the £5 note out and I started to go, who wants this? And all the guys are like, yeah, the white boy's giving away money, this is brilliant. And then I screwed it up. Who wants it now? Put it on the stage, stamped on it, dirty, ripped it a little bit. Who wants it now? Everyone's still got their hands in the air. I was like, why do you want it? It's broken, it's ripped, it's dirty. But you know what? It hasn't lost its value. And I'm here to tell you that whatever you've been through, you haven't lost your value. You're made in the image of God. You're loved. And it was so interesting. You could hear a pin drop in this noisy street. And I said to them, you know what? It would be my privilege that if you would like me to pray into any situation you're facing, the amount of trauma that these guys are going through is incredible. And I don't know if you heard the book, The Body Keeps Score. It talks about how trauma is stored in your body and not in your head. And it literally, you can store trauma. I just want to pray for you. And literally, so many people came forward. It was one of the best nights of my life. which then suddenly turned into one of the worst nights of my life because towards the end of the meeting, they got a DJ up and there were lots of people dancing. And then there's some guy, I was standing by the side of the stage feeling very relieved that it'd gone okay. And then this guy got on the stage and he went, "Who wants to see the white boy dance?" I was like, this is not going to happen. And they're like, yeah! I've never seen so many iPhones come out as so quickly as you, unbelievable. And then it was like so embarrassing. But everyone has value. Everyone has value. And we do feel broken, but it's okay. We're going to be okay. This video I'll finish with, and then I'm going to pray. And this was made by St. Michael's in Stoke Gifford. They rang me up and said, we've been listening to your talks on mental health and brokenness, and we made you a video. Now, when churches sometimes email me saying they've made me a video, it doesn't always fill me with joy, just because I'm never quite sure of the standard, and they've put it out on YouTube. And I'm like, oh, that's really good, thank you. But this is beautiful, actually, really beautiful. I love it. Check it out.
You know, life is about connection with other people, and the only way we can really connect with people is to be honest.
Kintsugi Hope has helped me realise that it's okay not to be okay.
The power in this is when people start to think, oh, I'm not on my own, I'm not alone. There's other people that feel like I do.
Kintsugi is a Japanese art form for repairing broken crockery.
They actually make a feature of the breaks and infill them with gold.
The whole thing is made more beautiful and more meaningful because of its brokenness.
Being honest isn't weak, it gives it strength, it's courage.
It really helped me just as a starting point to sort of discover a lot of these issues at a deeper level.
It's about getting to know yourself, really, rather than living by other people's values.
Kintsugi Hope allowed me to be welcomed into a group of people where I could be honest with myself in front of them and where there was no judgment.
It sheds light on the way you're feeling. It sheds light on why you are the way you are. And once you receive some of that light, you see more light at the end of the tunnel. It's a journey to healing.
Little illustration that will be really helpful for you in the Southwark Diocese. It's called How to Trap a Monkey. And if you want to trap a monkey, what you do is you get a coconut, all right? You make a hole in the coconut, you tie the coconut to a tree, and then you put a little bit of food in the coconut. And then what happens is the stupid monkey comes along and it grabs the food. And then all it needs to do to get free is what? Let go. Let go of the food. You'll be fine. Let go. But you know what the monkey doesn't do? Refuses to let go. And so the hunter captures the monkey. What a stupid monkey. But you know what? It's challenging, isn't it? What is it that we need to let go of in order to be? Maybe we need to let go of some of our previous ideas that we've just stuck to, because that's the way we've always done it in our church. Maybe I need to let go of my inner critic who normally gives me a good beating after I've done a talk at the Southwark Diocese Conference. Maybe we need to let go of our ego trying to impress people. I've got a friend, one of my best friends is a police officer. He had a nervous breakdown. He had to let go of the fact of the lie that says that he is weak. I've got friends who are single and childless in their 40s, and they've had to let go of the pressure that society puts on people to get married and start families. I've had friends who've lost people to suicide, and they've had to let go of the fact that could they have done more? Sheila Walsh says this, I think it's a beautiful quote. It talks about the verse, be still and know. Be still and know that I am God. The original Hebrew root meaning of be still doesn't mean be quiet. It means let go. That's very different, don't you think? Let go and know that I am God. Let go of trying to control your spouse. Let go of worry about your finances. Let go of unforgiveness. Let go of your past. Let go of what you can't control and rest in the knowledge that God is in control. When Elijah was suicidal, God didn't give him a pep talk. He didn't say, cheer up, Elijah, it's all going to be all right. Remember the cherubim, the meat was pretty good. Remember Carmel, he just cared with him tenderly. Eat, rest. He was a gentle presence. And I think if the church could understand that we need to be a gentle presence in people's lives, then we're going to see significant change. I'm going to read you a poem, and then we're done. But guys, thank you for listening so beautifully this afternoon. I know like the 3:30, the 4:30 is probably the graveyard slot. You've stayed awake, you've been engaged, you've kept eye contact. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. And please, please do come and talk to me. I'm with my colleague Ludovine, who runs all the group stuff. She is like the Kintsugi expert on groups. So please come and talk to us afterwards. We'd love to chat to you, or come and grab a book for someone who maybe is going through a tough time. When I finished this book, I wanted to finish with a poem. I quite like poetry. And I've got this precious friend called Jane, and she has a very rare form of blood cancer. And so she hasn't got out for, since COVID, she hasn't got out at all. And she said, oh, Patrick, I heard you're doing a charity called Discovering Treasure in Life's Scars. So I've written you a poem. It goes through the alphabet, and it's all the things that I've discovered in my cancer journey. And I actually think it's some of the most beautiful words that I've ever read. And I'm going to read it to you now. It says this: acceptance in the anguish, beauty in the bruises, belief in the brokenness, breakthrough in the battle, some comfort in the conflict, some courage in the crisis, some determination in the distress, some diamonds in the dust, direction in the difficulty, the discovery in the darkness, faith in the fear, fortitude in the frustration, grace in the grief, healing in the horror, hope in the hurt, a little bit of insight in the injury, some inspiration in the illness, some love in the loneliness, some mercy in the misunderstanding, some opportunity in this ordeal, some patience in the problem, some peace in the panic, some purpose in the pain, some refuge in the regrets, maybe some rest in the restrictions, some shelter in the shock, some strength in the shadows, some support in the sadness, treasure in the trials, trust in the trauma, victory in the vulnerability, and please God, wisdom in the weakness. Father God, I want to thank you for every single person in this room, and God, I don't know their interest in coming to a seminar called Mental Health Friendly Church. And Father, we've spoken about lots of things this afternoon, and I pray that we would be people that would really grapple with what's it mean to be a gentle presence in people's lives. Not to fix, not to rescue, but to be alongside, to listen, to create safe and supportive spaces, God. Lord, help us to know the things that we need to let go of in order to be more like you, to be people who have got a heart of compassion. And God, where people here, Lord, have been struggling with their own mental health and maybe told no one, because it's not the culture around here sometimes. God, would they just know your gentle presence today? That they would know that it's okay not to be okay. That they are loved, that they're special, not through all the sermons that they give and all the stuff that they do, as important as that all is, but just because they're your child. Father, we thank you for your presence. Help us as we go from this place to think small, create space in our lives, create space for doubts, and maybe think a little bit differently about how we do our ministry going forward. In your name we ask it. Amen. Amen. Thank you so much for listening so beautifully. I really appreciate that. Thanks for the tech team and Ludovine doing the slides as well. And do come and grab one of these if you're interested, and we'll go straight to the stand now. God bless you.